The hall of the Galactic Assembly was larger than any city Evan Hale had ever seen. It was not built for comfort or beauty. It was built to remind every species inside it how small they were. Thousands of delegates sat on floating platforms arranged in slow circles around a central floor of light. Some breathed liquid, some glowed, some were machines that had once been alive. Humanity's section was small, placed far from the center, almost like an afterthought. Evan stood behind the human ambassador, hands folded, posture straight. He was not a soldier. He was not a scientist. He was a logistics officer chosen because he could stay calm, remember details, and not panic when things went wrong. That made him, according to human standards, boring. According to the galaxy, he was invisible. The ambassador was finishing a carefully memorized speech about peace, cooperation, and shared progress. Evan had heard it many times during rehearsals. He knew exactly when the applause would come, polite and weak. Humanity was new here, a minor species from a mid-range star system. No psychic power, no natural weapons, no special energy output. Useful maybe, important no. Evan's eyes moved across the chamber anyway. He watched patterns, who listened, who pretended to listen, who looked away. Then the lights dimmed, not gently, not ceremonially. They dimmed as if something massive had blocked the stars themselves. A low sound rolled through the hall, not heard but felt like pressure against the chest. Several delegates froze. Others leaned back instinctively. The ambassador stopped speaking. A new platform descended from above, black and sharp-edged, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. Symbols burned across its surface in deep red lines that pulsed like slow heartbeats. Whispers spread instantly. The Nocturians, they were never early, they were never polite, and they were never ignored. Evan had read every file available on them. An ancient empire, expansionists in the past, rulers through fear rather than numbers. They did not drink blood, but they fed on bioenergy, emotional output, dominance signals. Fear made them stronger. Submission made them dangerous. People called them vampires because it was easier than explaining terror. The platform stopped. Figures emerged, tall and pale, with eyes like polished stone. Their movements were slow and controlled, as if time itself bent slightly around them, and at the center walked Princess Violia Noctire. She was smaller than the warriors around her, but the space seemed to move away from her steps. Her presence pressed down on the hall like gravity. Her long, dark armor was not decorative. It was ceremonial in the way a blade was ceremonial. Her eyes scanned the assembly with open boredom. Evan felt it then, not fear, not pain, pressure, like someone had placed a hand on his thoughts and squeezed lightly, testing. Around him, humans shifted uncomfortably. Some delegates from other species visibly weakened, their energy fields flickering. Violia's gaze passed over them all. Then it stopped. On him, Evan felt the pressure sharpen focus, not attacking, examining. His training kicked in without thought. Breathe steady, heart slow, mind quiet. He had learned that panic helped nothing, ever. The pressure met stillness. Violia's eyes narrowed slightly. That alone was enough to cause a ripple of unease among her escort. She stepped forward. The human ambassador opened his mouth, likely to apologize for something that had not yet happened. Violia raised one finger. Silence fell like a dropped weapon. She extended her arm, long and pale, and pointed directly at Evan Hale. "I want him," she said, her voice amplified without technology, calm and absolute, "as my husband." Then the hall exploded into noise. Human delegates shouted. Alien translators malfunctioned. Several species recoiled in horror. A marriage claim from a Nocturian royal was not romance. It was ownership. It was political absorption. It meant bloodless conquest. The human ambassador turned, face white, eyes wide, looking at Evan as if seeing him for the first time. Evan did not move. He was trying to understand what had just happened. He had never spoken to her. He had not even been aware she knew humans existed as individuals. Violia lowered her arm. Her expression was unreadable, but something like interest flickered behind her eyes. "The claim is lawful," she continued, "by ancient right. Witnessed by the assembly. His mind does not fracture under observation." "Excuse me," he said. The sound of a human voice cut through the chaos more sharply than any weapon. Every eye turned to him. He swallowed once, then met Violia's gaze directly, not challenging, not submissive, just level. "I don't believe anyone asked if I agreed." Instead, her lips curved very slightly. "No one ever does," she said. "That is why you are interesting." "But I won't be owned." Diplomats shouted. Analysts ran simulations that all ended badly. Evan sat alone in a side room, staring at his hands. He was not a hero. He was not chosen by destiny. He had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe the right one. A senior official entered, closing the door behind him. "You understand what this means," the man said quietly. Evan nodded. "If we refuse, they might destroy us. If we accept, they might control us. I just don't let it drive." As he stepped onto the dark platform, leaving Earth's representatives behind, a message spread quietly across human channels. "They are not taking our strongest. They are taking our calmest." The platform rose, carrying Evan Hale toward the heart of an empire built on fear. Princess Violia watched him from the corner of her eye. She had chosen a human, expecting a curiosity. She did not yet realize she had chosen a turning point. And somewhere deep within her ancient empire, something old and dangerous had just been invited inside. The Nocturian capital world did not welcome visitors. It endured them. From orbit, the planet looked dead, dark continents broken by thin red lines of energy that cut across the surface like old scars. No oceans reflected light. No clouds softened the view. Even the star above it seemed dimmer, as if the world itself consumed brightness. Evan Hale stood inside the transport chamber as the platform descended through the atmosphere. The air felt heavier here, thick with controlled pressure and unseen forces. Every system on the ship was silent. No vibrations, no comfort sounds. The Nocturians did not believe in easing fear. They believed fear was useful. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides and his breathing slow. Around him stood guards twice his height, pale faces expressionless, eyes faintly glowing. Their armor was not decorative. It was alive, responding to their emotional state. Evan had already noticed the subtle shifts when they grew irritated or curious. They watched him constantly. He let them. The platform settled into a vast open hall carved directly into black stone. The ceiling rose so high it disappeared into shadow. Red light flowed through veins in the walls, pulsing in time with something deeper, something planetary. Princess Violia stepped forward first. She moved with certainty, as if the world adjusted itself to her presence. She did not look back to see if Evan followed. He did. Nocturian nobles waited in silence, arranged in curved rows above the floor. Their attention was sharp and hungry. Evan felt it immediately, the same pressure as before, but multiplied. Dozens of minds pressed against his, probing, tasting. Many humans would have broken. Evan did not push back. He focused inward the way he had learned during long nights on cargo ships, during crises where panic killed faster than fire. He let the pressure pass over him instead of through him. A ripple of surprise moved through the nobles. Whispers followed. "A human," one voice murmured. "So small," said another. "Why is he still standing?" "This is Evan Hale," she said, "my chosen consort." "Then you hide weakness." He noticed how everything was designed to confuse sense of direction. No straight lines, no clear markers, a control tactic. His quarters were large, cold, and empty. Stone walls, a single raised platform for rest, no restraints, no guards inside. That worried him more than chains would have. The door sealed shut. Minutes passed, or hours. Time felt different here. Then the air shifted. Someone was watching him, not through eyes, through energy. Evan sat on the platform and closed his eyes, letting his mind slow even further. He felt the touch gentle but invasive, like fingers brushing the edges of thought. Violia. She stood unseen, testing. Most species reacted with fear, some with anger. Evan reacted with curiosity. He opened his eyes. "I assume this is private," he said. The shadows moved and Violia stepped into the light. "You are difficult to read," she said. "You do not resist, you do not submit." "I am," Evan answered. "I just don't think it helps you if I show it." That unsettled them. Nocturians ruled through certainty, through dominance. Humans, Evan realized, survived through adaptation, through questioning bad systems until they broke. Assassination attempts began quietly. A malfunctioning door seal, a corrupted energy field, a servant who lingered too close. Each time, Evan survived not because he was stronger, but because he noticed patterns, timing. Behavior shifts, the way tension built before action. He reported nothing directly. Instead, he adjusted his routines. The attempt stopped. Word spread. The human sees traps. Memories shook. Pain flickered at the edges. He focused on one thing, breathing. The pressure broke. The noble recoiled stunned. Violia stood. "That is enough," she said coldly. Later, she confronted Evan alone. "You should have broken," she said. "Maybe," Evan replied. "But humans evolved on a dangerous world. Calm kept us alive." "No," Evan corrected gently. "It's control." "Why did you choose me?" Evan asked finally. She did not answer at once. "When my kind feeds," she said, "we feel truth. Your mind does not fracture. It does not lie easily. It does not collapse under pressure." Something like amusement flickered in her eyes. "You are not what the galaxy thinks humans are," she said. "Neither are you," Evan replied. That earned him a long, unreadable stare. As they walked on, unseen currents shifted around them. Nobles whispered. Guards watched more closely. The Empire had expected a pet. Instead, it had brought in a mirror. And mirrors made monsters uncomfortable. Far away across the stars, humanity waited. They did not know if Evan Hale would survive. But within the heart of the Nocturian Empire, something dangerous had begun to spread. Not fear. An idea. That dominance was not the only way to rule. And that the quiet human walking beside the vampire princess might be far more dangerous than any army. Evan had learned quickly that the Nocturian capital was alive in ways humans could not easily understand. Every surface pulsed with energy, every shadow seemed to carry memory, and the air itself felt thick with awareness. Even the corridors he had walked 100 times seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. But he did not panic. Humans were built for uncertainty, for danger without understanding. That was their advantage. He had spent weeks studying the Empire's ways, not as a diplomat, not as a soldier, but as an observer. Every noble had a routine, every guard a pattern, every energy pulse a rhythm that could be traced and predicted. Where Nocturian's senses were sharp, Evan's patience was sharper. Where they moved with certainty and power, he moved with careful calculation. And slowly, imperceptibly, the Empire began to notice. Princess Violia, for her part, was equally fascinated. She had expected a timid human, weak and fearful. What she found instead was an individual who refused to break under scrutiny, who met every test with calm logic. It was infuriating. It was intoxicating. Her instincts told her to dominate, to bend him, to test him in ways her predecessors would have considered normal. But each attempt only revealed more of what she had not expected. One evening, she invited him into a private chamber, a place deep within the palace where energy currents twisted in impossible patterns. It was quiet, save for the soft hum that emanated from the walls themselves. Evan stepped inside, hands folded calmly, sensing the shift in her presence before he saw her. "You have survived longer than I expected," Violia said, her voice low but carrying the weight of centuries. "I do what I must," Evan replied simply. "Humans survive by noticing what others miss." Calm makes things changeable. They could endure pressure, survive manipulation, and outthink predators without relying on raw power. "You are dangerous," she said finally, more a statement than a warning. "I'm just alive," Evan replied. "That's all humans ever are, alive and thinking." It was curiosity, sharp and insistent, running alongside a grudging respect. Most creatures bent or broke when faced with her. This human did neither. Days later, during a formal bonding ritual, Violia attempted the standard Nocturian energy connection, designed to assess loyalty, obedience, and potential for influence. She expected resistance, fear, perhaps even subconscious submission. Instead, she felt something entirely different. Evan's mind did not shatter. His memories did not hide. His emotions did not amplify. They flowed evenly, calmly, like a river undisturbed by wind. For the first time, Violia felt the limits of her own power. Her species thrived on dominance, on the ability to manipulate energy and fear. With Evan, none of it worked. He was a puzzle she could not solve, a force she could not bend. And that realization stirred something dangerous in her, a mixture of fascination and unease. "You do not fear me," she said after the connection ended. "I do," Evan admitted, "just not the way you think." "I fear what you are capable of," he said. "But fear is only useful if it drives action. If it just controls you, it is wasted." Over the following weeks, the relationship between observer and observed deepened. Evan began asking questions no Nocturian had asked in centuries. Why did they rely so heavily on fear? Why were alliances so brittle? Why did their empire, so vast and old, still face internal power struggles? His questions were subtle. He did not accuse. He did not demand answers. He simply noticed patterns and asked aloud. At first, Violia ignored them. Then slowly she found herself considering his words. The nobles were right to fear him, but for reasons they did not understand. His mind was a tool as sharp as any weapon, and sharper than most of their energy fields. "You see weaknesses where I see tradition," she said one night, walking with him along the palace's inner terraces. The city below was alive with red energy, a living lattice of power that pulsed like a heartbeat. "That is what humans do," Evan said. "We survive by adapting, by finding flaws in systems that others think are perfect." "You are not afraid of my kind." Energy manipulations intended to provoke panic resulted in calm responses. Attempts to intimidate ended in analysis. Slowly, the whispers grew. The human could not be controlled. Violia noticed, and she felt something she had not felt in centuries: uncertainty. Her empire thrived on certainty. The strongest survived, the clever ruled, and fear maintained order. Yet here was a human, small and fragile in body, reshaping the rules simply by enduring. The princess began to test him in other ways: private duels not to harm but to provoke strategy, negotiations with nobles where he was expected to falter. Each time, Evan navigated the challenge with a calm she could not anticipate. It fascinated her, it infuriated her, and it terrified her. One evening, as the two walked through a garden of bioluminescent plants that reacted to thought, Violia stopped. "Why are you not afraid of me?" she asked again. "Because fear is only useful if it moves you," Evan said. "If it just paralyses, it belongs to you. I don't let it belong to me." She realized the truth. This human was not weak. He was unpredictable, a species that could not be drained, controlled, or easily dominated. Humanity itself had been underestimated across the galaxy, and here, in the heart of her empire, one human was already proving why. The bond between them, formal as it was, began to change. Violia found herself watching him when she thought she was alone. She noticed how he adapted without resistance, how he found solutions where her people had only force. The palace became a chessboard, and for the first time the queen feared the pawn, but in a way that was thrilling rather than threatening. Evan, unaware of how deeply he was affecting the empire, continued to observe and ask questions. He learned the intricacies of Nocturian politics, the histories of power struggles, the energy cycles that allowed the empire to function. And as he learned, he began to formulate ideas that could save lives, ideas that could prevent civil war, ideas that could change centuries of rule without the use of violence. Violia noticed, of course. She listened as he spoke of strategies that used alliances rather than fear, trust rather than submission. His ideas were strange to her, human, yet she could see their effectiveness. "You are dangerous," she whispered once, alone with him on the terrace. The city's red energy pulsed below them like a living heart. "You are small, fragile, and yet everything you do shakes the empire." And yet this human, so small, so unassuming, was teaching her something new. That power was not always the ability to crush. Sometimes it was the ability to endure, to adapt, to see the world differently and survive. And in that realization, the first seeds of change were planted. The Nocturian Empire, ancient and fearsome, had met a human who could not be tamed, and who, without trying, was already beginning to teach its princess how fragile certainty really was. Evan did not know it yet, but he had crossed a threshold. The Empire had expected a pet. What they had received was a mirror, and mirrors, Violia realized, could be far more dangerous than weapons. For the first time, she wondered not how she would shape him, but how he might shape her, and the thought both terrified and exhilarated her. The galaxy beyond the walls would soon learn that humans were not fragile. But inside the palace, Violia was about to learn that one calm, observing human could be more powerful than 1,000 centuries of fear. And that was only the beginning. The Nocturian High Council had never faced a challenge like this. For centuries, their empire had been orderly and predictable. Fear maintained obedience, power commanded loyalty, and tradition was law. And yet here was a human, small and fragile by physical standards, walking through their halls and disrupting everything simply by existing. Evan Hale had become a problem that could not be ignored. It began quietly. Certain nobles had attempted to force him into compliance. Subtle energy manipulations, public humiliation, even veiled threats. Each time Evan adapted. He did not panic, he did not submit, he did not retaliate with violence. He learned. He observed. And slowly he exposed weaknesses in the empire systems, weaknesses that had been invisible to centuries of rulers. Whispers spread among the nobility. The human cannot be broken. He moves without fear, yet his mind is sharper than ours. He is not a tool to be used, he is dangerous. She observed the subtle changes in alliances, the hesitant movements of nobles who had once acted with certainty. The palace, a place of calculated order, now vibrated with uncertainty. The High Council decided it could not risk him any longer. If a human could not be controlled, he could not be allowed to live. Some members advocated public execution, a show of power to remind all species that humans were fragile and expendable. Others proposed secret assassination. The plan was simple: isolate him, create a situation where the blame would be impossible to trace, and remove him quietly. Evan knew nothing of this at first. He continued his studies, continued his careful observation, continued walking beside Violia as she conducted her duties. He noticed patterns in the palace routines, signals from guards, subtle shifts in energy currents. It was enough. Humans had survived worse threats in history, not through force, but through understanding, adaptation, and foresight. The first attempt came one evening when Evan was called to review security protocols with a group of senior officials. A hidden energy pulse was triggered in the walls, designed to collapse his neural pathways and incapacitate him. The chamber's doors sealed automatically, a trap perfectly calculated to appear accidental. Evan paused, closed his eyes, and felt the energy. It was subtle but predictable. He shifted his weight slightly, adjusted his breathing, and allowed the pulse to flow around him. It passed harmlessly. The officials stared, frozen. The pulse had been intended to eliminate him. It had not. He looked up calmly. "You might want to recalibrate," he said. No one knew if he was mocking or simply observing. That same night, Violia confronted him privately. Her energy field shimmered faintly, warning, testing, expecting some sign of submission. "You were supposed to die," she said. Her voice was sharp. "This was not a lesson, it was a necessity. And yet you are terrifying." Servants who lingered too long in corridors, energy traps hidden in ventilation systems, even nobles pretending to offer guidance. Each attempt failed because Evan anticipated, adapted, and used his understanding of patterns. With every failure, the High Council grew more desperate. Some of them began to consider alliances with species they had long considered inferior. If a human could not be controlled, perhaps they could be redirected. But the very act of considering this weakened their authority. Violia watched the council, amused and thoughtful, as their empire began to shift before her eyes. One day, a group of nobles confronted Evan directly. They demanded submission, obedience, and acknowledgement of their superiority. They moved in a coordinated display, intending to overwhelm him. Evan did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He spoke calmly. "I am here, I observe, I adapt. If you wish to challenge me, do so through logic, not threats. Fear does not bend me." Within minutes, what was meant to be a show of dominance became a display of their own incompetence. Violia entered silently during the confrontation. She watched as the human handled the nobles not with force, but with observation, patience, and insight. He highlighted weaknesses in their strategy, suggested compromises that exposed their flaws, and navigated their aggression without aggression of his own. She felt a thrill she had not experienced in centuries. Not fear, not desire, understanding. The kind of understanding that could reshape an empire. After the confrontation, she spoke to him privately. "You are changing things," she said. "Not with armies, not with weapons, but with thought. That is dangerous." Violia's guards became cautious, observing him more closely, only to realize that he anticipated almost every move they made. Evan had no intention of overthrowing the empire. He was not a conqueror. He was a human. He survived. He learned. He adapted. And by doing so, he revealed to the empire its own flaws. A secret meeting of the High Council convened. They decided on a radical measure. If they could not remove him, they would manipulate Violia to send him away. They believed that even she, powerful and cunning, could be influenced by her own political concerns. Violia, however, was already aware of their plan. She had observed the subtle changes in alliances, the hidden whispers, the glances of suspicion, and she had made a choice. Evan did not yet understand it, but their partnership had evolved. Where she had once seen him as a curiosity, she now saw him as an equal. His calm logic and strategic mind had earned her trust, even if she could not fully admit it. When the council attempted to pressure her, she deflected every suggestion, every demand, every subtle threat. The nobles had underestimated her, assuming that she would act according to tradition. But Violia had learned something from Evan. Strength could take many forms. Sometimes it was domination. Sometimes it was control. Sometimes it was insight and timing. The council grew frustrated, their authority weakening with each failed maneuver. Other species in the empire began to take notice. Whispers spread across the political network. The human could not be controlled. The princess defied tradition. Change was coming, whether they wanted it or not. Evan, meanwhile, continued his quiet work. He studied energy flows, political structures, and the rhythms of the palace. He did not attempt to manipulate anyone. He did not assert power. He simply understood. And understanding, as Violia had discovered, was its own form of power. One evening, she took him to the highest tower of the palace, overlooking the vast, dark continents and the red veins of energy that cut across the surface. She had brought him here not as a lesson, but as a conversation. "You understand what you have done," she said. "You have not broken my empire with force. You have not killed anyone. You have disrupted it by existing. You are not afraid of them." And for the first time, she felt uncertain about what her empire could do to someone who could not be controlled. Weeks later, the council attempted a final measure. They would orchestrate an accident during a ceremonial event. Energy pulses, structural failures, and controlled chaos were planned to eliminate him publicly. Evan anticipated every move. He had observed patterns, studied signals, and calculated timing. When the event occurred, he navigated the chaos with precision, ensuring no harm came to himself or anyone else. The nobles were exposed, their failures evident to all observers. Violia watched quietly, pride and amazement in her eyes. The Empire had intended to remove a human they considered fragile. Instead, they had demonstrated their own weakness to themselves. By the time the chaos ended, alliances had shifted. Nobles whispered cautiously, reconsidering their positions. Some began to study humans more closely, others feared them, and all of them watched Evan Hale, the quiet observer who had survived everything thrown at him. Violia approached him in the aftermath. "You have done something no one expected," she said. "Not with violence, but with thought. That is more dangerous than any weapon." He had not sought power, he had not sought fame. He had only survived, observed, and learned. And in doing so, he had changed the heart of an empire. The Nocturian Empire, ancient and fearsome, had been forced to reconsider its foundations. Fear was no longer absolute, power was no longer certain. And one human, small and seemingly fragile, had become a force that even centuries of tradition could not ignore. Evan Hale had survived. He had observed, he had learned, and the galaxy had begun to take notice. For Violia, the lesson was clear. Strength was not only about dominance. Survival, insight, and calm could reshape empires, and a human had just proven it. The palace was no longer the same. The council was no longer the same, and neither, quietly, was Violia. The first seeds of lasting change had been planted, and from now on, nothing in the empire would be predictable again. The Nocturian Empire had always believed in certainty. Every decision, every alliance, every energy flow was calculated to maintain control. Fear was their law, dominance their language, and obedience their goal. And yet here they stood at a threshold they did not anticipate, all because of one human who refused to break. Evan Hale had survived, not by weapons, not by energy manipulation, not by strength. He survived by understanding, by patience, by observation, by refusing to allow fear or intimidation to control him. And in doing so, he had shaken the foundations of a civilization that had endured for millennia. Princess Violia stood beside him as they surveyed the vast council chamber, now quiet after the most chaotic meeting in living memory. The High Council had been forced to acknowledge their miscalculations. Nobles who once demanded dominance had begun to reconsider their strategies. Others, terrified by the human's resilience, were quietly seeking alliances with him rather than plotting against him. Violia's gaze followed Evan's calm movements. She had chosen him expecting curiosity. She had expected compliance. What she did not expect was equality, an unpredictable force of logic, insight, and resilience that could not be dominated. "You have changed things," she said softly. Her voice carried more weight than any council decree. "I survive," Evan replied. "That is all humans ever do. The rest is consequence." Humans endure by seeing the cracks, not by pretending they do not exist. "I seek understanding, and survival, that is what humans always do." The nobles had learned through failed attempts that his perspective could not be dismissed lightly. They debated energy allocation, planetary defenses, and trade strategies. Evan listened carefully, spoke only when needed, and asked questions that revealed hidden flaws. Slowly, the council realized that by understanding him, they could not dominate him, but by cooperating with him, they could strengthen the empire in ways that had been overlooked for centuries. Violia watched all of it with quiet fascination. She realized that the human's greatest weapon was not defiance or cleverness alone, but his ability to survive in a system built to crush life. His calm, thoughtful presence had turned fear into uncertainty among the council members, and uncertainty had opened the door for change. One of the older nobles, a sharp-eyed strategist, finally spoke openly. "He is unlike any species we have encountered. He does not yield, he does not submit, and yet he does not attack unless necessary. This, human, may be the key to preserving the empire, not destroying it. Other species within the empire began to see humanity not as weak newcomers, but as a species immune to the very weapons the empire had relied upon for centuries. Evan, however, remained himself. He did not seek to dominate. He did not demand reverence. He observed, learned, and advised. He understood the limits of influence, the subtle ways in which power could be exercised without breaking rules or people. Violia approached him one evening, walking through the terraces overlooking the red-veined landscape of the capital. The city pulsed like a living heart, energy flowing through veins and corridors, a reflection of the empire itself. "You have taught me," she said softly. "Not with weapons, not with force, not with commands. You have taught me by enduring, by thinking, by seeing clearly." Violia considered his words carefully. For centuries, her kind had ruled by fear, by dominance, by the assumption that weaker species were powerless. Yet here was a human, small, unarmed, and untrained in Nocturian energy manipulation, who had not only survived but altered the balance of the empire. "Perhaps," she said, "that is why I chose you." The empire, once rigid and predictable, was beginning to see change, not forced from outside, but guided quietly by a species that could not be controlled. Across the galaxy, news of the human consort spread. Humanity was no longer merely a newcomer. They were a species to be reckoned with, a species immune to the subtle weapons that had governed politics for centuries. Other empires began to reconsider their assumptions, studying humanity with the same intensity that had once been reserved for the Nocturians themselves. Inside the palace, Evan and Violia walked together frequently, discussing strategy, observing the court, and learning from one another. She had learned patience, subtlety, and the strength that came from endurance. He had learned the complexities of an empire built on fear and energy, seeing its patterns and understanding its flaws. One day, a minor crisis arose. A neighboring system attempted to exploit a perceived weakness in the empire, believing that the human consort was a distraction. Military planners convened, preparing for a rapid response. Evan was invited to participate. He listened carefully, observed patterns in supply lines, energy flows, and political alliances, and suggested a strategy that neutralized the threat without bloodshed. The nobles were amazed. The human, who could not be controlled, had preserved the empire's power more effectively than any conventional tactic. Violia stood beside him during the council session, watching the reactions. She felt pride, but also something deeper, a recognition that humanity's true power was not force, but resilience, observation, and adaptability. The empire, ancient and formidable, had been reshaped without war, without dominance, simply because one human refused to break. By the time the formal ceremony took place to acknowledge Evan as the human consort, the empire had already changed. Nobles approached him with caution and respect. Alliances were strengthened. Traditions were reconsidered. And across the galaxy, humanity's reputation had shifted from fragile newcomers to a species that could not be easily subdued. Violia took his hand during the ceremony, her energy radiating subtly, a reflection of trust and partnership rather than dominance. The High Council observed in silence, understanding that the balance of power had shifted. "You have changed everything," Violia whispered once the ceremony concluded. "I survived," Evan replied. "That is all humans ever do." A symbol that strength was not always measured in weapons or energy dominance. Strength could be endurance, understanding, and the ability to survive in systems built to crush life. Evan continued his work quietly. He advised, observed, and adapted. Violia continued to learn from him, incorporating his insights into her governance. The empire became stronger, more resilient, and more adaptable because of the human who had refused to break. Across the stars, whispers of humanity's resilience spread. Species that had once considered humans weak began to study them carefully. Humanity had become a force, not because they wielded power in the conventional sense, but because they could not be controlled, predicted, or easily defeated. Inside the palace, Evan and Violia walked together through the corridors of power, discussing strategy, observing patterns, and planning for the future. Their partnership was no longer ceremonial. It was collaborative, a blending of insight, resilience, and understanding. The Nocturian Empire, once rigid and predictable, had become adaptable and thoughtful. Its power was preserved not through fear alone, but through partnership, observation, and the quiet influence of a human who refused to be dominated. And somewhere deep within the hearts of both the princess and the human, a realization took root. Strength was not in dominance but in endurance. Not in fear but in understanding. Not in control but in adaptation. Evan Hale had survived. He had observed. He had learned. And the galaxy had begun to take notice. The Empire would endure. Humanity would endure. And together, the human consort and the vampire princess had changed the course of history, not through force, but through quiet resilience, insight, and partnership. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. It would never do so again. Evan looked out over the capital, feeling the pulse of energy beneath the planet's surface, the subtle currents of politics, and the watchful eyes of 1,000 nobles. He was small, human, and fragile in form, but invincible in ways the Empire was only beginning to understand. Beside him, Violia Noctaire smiled, a mixture of pride, curiosity, and something deeper. She had chosen him expecting a novelty. She had received an equal, and together they would guide the Empire into a future that no one, not even the galaxy itself, could predict. Strength, they both knew, had many forms, and the most dangerous form was the one that could endure everything and still remain unbroken. The galaxy would remember this human. The Empire would remember him. And from now on, no species would underestimate humanity again. The human consort and the vampire princess walked side by side through the halls of the Nocturian Empire, not as master and subject, but as partners. And in that partnership, the galaxy learned its first lesson. Survival, observation, and resilience were powers greater than fear itself. Evan Hale had changed the Empire. Humanity had changed the galaxy. And in doing so, the stars themselves seemed to hum a new song, one of endurance, adaptation, and the quiet, unstoppable force of a human who refused to be broken. And for the first time, the Nocturian Empire felt truly alive.